Welcome to A Year of War and Peace. I'm your host, Brian E. Denton. A Year of War and Peace is a daily, year-long, chapter-by-chapter reading of and meditation on Leo Tolstoy's epic novel, War and Peace. In these videos and podcasts, you'll be treated to a free reading of one chapter per day of the novel, plus a reflective essay I've written individually tailored to that day's chapter. These readings are offered for free, though if you'd like to support me, you can do so in one of three ways. First, you could purchase my ebook, A Year of War and Peace. It features the entire novel, plus all of my reflective essays, and it's only $2.99 on Amazon.com. You could also become a patron at patreon.com/BrianEDenton. If you sign up there, you'll receive a sonnet once a month, plus a link to an ebook of my collected sonnets. Finally, if you like, you can make a one-time donation to my PayPal account. The email there is brianedenton@gmail.com. You can also use that email to contact me. I'd be happy to hear from you. Your support is greatly appreciated. Today's reading and reflection is from chapter 291. Chapter 291. It was a warm, dark autumn night. It had been raining for 4 days. Having changed horses twice and galloped 20 miles in an hour and a half over sticky, muddy road, Bakovnitov reached Levechka after 1 o'clock at night. Dismounting at a cottage on whose wattle fence hung a signboard General Staff, and throwing down his reins, he entered a dark passage. "The general on duty, quick! It's very important," said he to someone who had risen and was sniffing in the dark passage. "He has been very unwell since the evening, and this is the third night he has not slept," said the orderly pleadingly in a whisper. "You should wake the captain first." "But this is very important, from General Doktorov," said Bolkonitinov, entering the open door, which he had found by feeling in the dark. The orderly had gone in before him and began waking somebody. Your honor, a courier." "What? What's that? From whom?" came a sleepy voice. "From Doktorov and from Alexei Petrovich. Napoleon is at Furminsk," said Bolkonitinov, unable to see in the dark who was speaking, but guessing by the voice that it was not Konoyevsyn. The man who had awakened yawned and stretched himself. "I don't like waking him," he said, fumbling for something. "He is very ill. Perhaps this is only a rumor." "Here is the dispatch," said Bolkonitinov. "My orders are to give it at once to the general on duty." "Wait a moment, I'll light a candle." "You damned rascal. Where do you always hide it?" said the voice of a man who was stretching himself to the orderly. This was Sherbinin, Konyutsyn's adjutant. I found it, he added. The orderly was striking a light when Sherbinin was fumbling for something on the candlestick. "Oh, the nasty beasts," said he with disgust. By the light of the sparks, Bolkonitinov saw Sherbin's youthful face as he held the candle, and the face of another man who was still asleep. This was Konoyevsyn. When the flame of the sulfur splinters kindled by the tinder burned up, first blue and then red, Sherbinin lit the tallow candle from the candlestick on which the cockroaches that had been gnawing at it were running away, and looked at the messenger. Bolkonitinov was bespattered all over with mud and had smeared his face by wiping it with his sleeve. "Who gave the report?" inquired Sherbinin, taking the envelope. "The news is reliable," said Bolkonitinov. "Prisoners, Cossacks, and the scouts all say the same thing." "There's nothing to be done. We'll have to wake him," said Sherbinin, rising and going up to the man in the nightcap who lay covered by a greatcoat. "Peter Petrovich," said he. Konoyevsyn did not stir. "To the general staff," he said with a smile, knowing that those words would be sure to arouse him. And in fact, the head in the nightcap was lifted at once. On Konoyevsyn's handsome, resolute face, with cheeks flushed by fever, there still remained for an instant a faraway, dreamy expression, remote from present affairs. But then he suddenly started, and his face assumed its habitual calm and firm appearance. "Well, what is it? From whom?" he asked immediately, but without hurry, blinking in the light. While listening to the officer's report, Konoyevsyn broke the seal and read the dispatch. Hardly had he done so before he lowered his legs in their wooden stockings to the earthen floor and began putting on his boots. Then he took off his nightcap, combed his hair over his temples, and donned his cap. "Did you get here quickly? Let us go to His Highness." Konevitsin had understood at once that the news brought was of great importance, and that no time must be lost. He did not consider or ask himself whether the news was good or bad. That did not interest him. He regarded the whole business of the war not with his intelligence or his reason, but by something else. There was within him a deep, unexpressed conviction that all would be well, and that one must not trust to this and still less speak about it, but only must attend to one's own work. And he did his work, giving his whole strength to the task. Peter Petrovich Konevitsin, like Doktorov, seem to have been included merely for propriety's sake in the list of the so-called heroes of 1812, the Barclays, Revskys, Ermolovs, Platovs, and the Miloradoviches. Like Doktorov, he had the reputation of being a man of very limited capacity and information, and, like Doktorov, he never made plans of battle, but was always found where the situation was most difficult. Since his appointment as general on duty, he had always slept with his door open, giving orders that every messenger should be allowed to wake him up. In battle, he was always under fire, so that Kutuzov reproved him for it and feared to send him to the front, and, like Doktorov, he was one of those unnoticed cogwheels that, without clatter or noise, constitute the most essential part of the machine. Coming out of the hut into the damp, dark night, Konyetyev frowned, partly from an increased pain in his head and partly at the unpleasant thought that occurred to him, of how all that nest of influential men on the staff would be stirred up by this news, especially Bennigsen, who ever since Tatarino had been at daggers drawn with Kutuzov, and how they would make suggestions, quarrel, issue orders, and rescind them. And this premonition was disagreeable to him, though he knew it cannot be helped. And in fact Toll, to whom he went to communicate the news, immediately began to expound his plans to a general sharing his quarters, until Konevitsin, who listened in wary silence, reminded him that they must go to see His Highness. All right, that concludes my reading of chapter 291. I will now proceed to my reflection on the same. A Year of War and Peace, day 291. Make haste. A big moment occurs, roughly 50 shiftless pages into Ivan Goncharov's novel Oblomov. The main character moves from his bed to a bedside chair. That's about the extent of the action he takes during the whole book. He is a man, applying that term's most liberal, perhaps even strictly biological meaning, a man who has been ruined by a life of luxurious comfort and lack of discipline. Oblomov's idle nature and tragic end would serve as a cautionary tale for today's prime-age non-working male, if only that population preferred 19th century Russian literature to video games and opioid addiction. As it happens, Ilya Ilyich Oblomov, the novel's indolent anti-hero, dies in his bed just as he lived in it. His life, bereft of industry and absent of vocation, is exactly the opposite of the Russian generals we've met recently in our reading. Yesterday, we spoke of Doktorov, a little cogwheel in the Russian war machine. We left him as he dispatched an officer, Bolkhanitov, to inform the general staff that the French army has been located. Today, Bolkhanitov arrives at the general staff headquarters in the dead of night. He announces himself and his charge. Konevitsin, the intended recipient of Doktorov's information, is asleep and with fever. Despite this, he rises upon hearing the news. He sets to work immediately. Writes Tolstoy, Konevitsin had understood at once that the news brought was of great importance, and that no time must be lost. He did not consider or ask himself whether the news was good or bad. That did not interest him. He regarded the whole business of the war not with his intelligence or his reason, but by something else. There was within him a deep, unexpressed conviction that all would be well, but that one must not trust to this and still less speak about it, but must only attend to one's own work. And he did his work, giving his whole strength to the task. Clearly, Konevitsin suffers from no Oblomovitis. He understands his role and fulfills it no matter the hour or his state of health. Such are the values and practices that have silently turned the tide of the war against the French. They can work for you too. Daily meditation. Dost thou exist then to take thy pleasure, and not at all for action or exertion? Dost thou not see the little plants, the little birds, the ants, the spiders, the bees, working together to put in order their several parts of the universe? And art thou unwilling to do the work of a human being? And dost thou not make haste to do that which is according to thy nature? Marcus Aurelius, Meditations. All right, that concludes my reading of and reflection on chapter 291 of War and Peace. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks so much for listening. Remember that if you'd like to support me, you can do so either by purchasing the ebook, A Year of War and Peace, becoming a patron at patreon.com, or making a one-time donation to PayPal. The links to all that are down below in the show notes. Also in the show notes, you're going to find a link to my Amazon wish lists for books and movies. And if you decide to support me by buying me one of those, we'll set up a little Zoom call to talk about that book or movie or whatever you want to talk about. Your support is greatly appreciated. Tomorrow, we're going to be reading and reflecting on chapter 292 of War and Peace. I hope you'll join me. Until then, take care of yourselves and others, and keep mispronouncing those Russian names.